Good morning, everybody. My name is Rick Gibson. I'm the Chief Executive of the BGI. We run the National Video Game Museum up in Sheffield. We're a charity that works on games education and culture and diversity. And I'm delighted to have a panel of some really interesting, experienced people who are going to talk about how we nurture the talent of the future. So I'm going to just go through our panelists and ask them to introduce themselves. I'm going to call you out if I may. Nick, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Nick Gorse. I'm the head of the School of Art and Design at Coventry University.
Thank you. Tasha.
Hi, I'm Tasha Nathani. I am a technical producer at Rebellion in Oxford.
Thank you. Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Clark. I'm one of the leaders at Woodlows Primary School in Warwick.
Fantastic. And Kieran. Oh, I'm not getting any audio from you, Kieran.
Because I'm on mute, I'm such an idiot.
Yeah,
I'm Kieran Holland. I manage the recruitment function at Sumo across our 13 studios around the world.
Great. Well, look, thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to set the scene for all of those who are watching in advance of going to some Q&A. And I wanted just to give an idea as to what does the games industry look like at the moment? Well, the games development industry is the fastest growing creative industry in the UK today. Roughly 19,000 people make games professionally in the UK today, and they make them right across the country. They're not stuck in a couple of postcodes in London. That number grew by 12% last year during the pandemic. That's the biggest growth that this industry has ever experienced. So there's an old maxim about the games development industry being recession proof. It has proven that time and again over 40 years now. Starting salaries, if you want to start a career in games, range from maybe late teens to early 20s. They can rise into the 30s and maybe 40s for mid-level developers. And then for seniors, it might be into the 50s and well above that for team leaders. So there are lots of well-paid, exciting, challenging careers in an industry, and those careers can be lifelong. So that's all very positive, but there are two big challenges to that rosy picture. First of all, our workforce is not as diverse as either our players or our populations. That should be a massive commercial incentive to the industry to diversify its workforce so that they can make games for everyone. Now, I should say that industry is making great strides forwards in encouraging diverse candidates. And a quick look at the nearly 100 organizations that have signed up to run inclusive events about games careers during the Games Careers Week festival that is starting next month, that tells you that the industry wants to change. Also, the other issue is that it's really competitive getting a job in the games sector. At the moment, we have in the region of 20,000 young people are studying games development at university level at the moment, and 7,000 of those young people will graduate in the summer of 2022. The industry will not be able to absorb all of those people. But I would also say that if you take a great games development degree, that will equip you with transferable skills that are highly sought after by other industries. So lots of positives, some challenges. And I think what I want to do is go on to our panel and ask a few questions that might illuminate what careers in games and the pathways towards careers in games might look like. So the first question is, what is the one piece of advice that you have for parents and younger children who might be considering games careers? And if I may, I'd like to start with Matt from Woodlows Primary School.
Yeah, I think don't be dismissive would be my biggest piece of advice to parents, because actually, you know, as a parent of two children myself, you know, some of the resilience and kind of the perseverance that comes through kind of playing games and kind of being fascinated by games, I think is really important. So I think actually a lot of parents are quick to sort of say, you know, that's just time wasting, whereas actually, as you quite rightly pointed out, there's a huge career opportunity there with something that really does capture children's imagination. So actually don't be dismissive of that, and try and nurture, encourage that, but also, you know, encourage questions like, why do you think that happens? You know, when you press that key, why do you think it does that? Why do you think that might change? And start that curiosity quite early on. So definitely be encouraged. Don't be dismissive, because it's a learning opportunity.
Wonderful. And I would just echo that by saying that in the National Video Game Museum, every day we have families coming through with their kids, learning not just playing, but learning how games are made. And it's wonderful to see the engagement of young people. Nick Gorse, would you give the perspective from a university, please?
So from a university perspective, I think advice would be, again, something around resilience, something around creativity. And, you know, in reality, everything I do in my school is about storytelling. And that's really important to understand that. So again, it's about an excitement about story, engagement, interaction. And again, I completely agree with Matt, not being dismissive. It's a fantastic area. The other thing that we see in my school, particularly because it's a big school, we've got things like animation and graphics and automotive design, which are also interested in games. So the whole design element is actually really quite exciting. And that's something which is key for us. I've got interior design and architecture students that are interested in games, showing their designs through the games process. So I think it's a really exciting area where people should explore and think about it, and not just think about it being just about games. It's about a more expansive sort of discussion and debate, particularly around, I mean, we keep talking about it at the moment around storytelling and talking to people.
If I may, and I won't echo every single comment, but that really strikes a chord. There are so many different skills that you utilize if you're making games, and what you'll find is people who are from writers on one end of the spectrum to the artists, the animators, the people project managing, to the programmers. These are all skills that are based on the STEM or the STEAM skills, the science, technology, engineering, arts and math skills that schools are trying to teach. And so games are a fantastic tool in the classroom to, as Matt says, to engage young people with what is often their favorite entertainment medium. Tasha, what advice would you share with parents and younger children?
So for parents and younger children, this is actually advice I've had to give recently as I work with a mentee who's interested in games development. And the one kind of bit of advice as I've said to her is to actually start building her portfolio. If she's sure of the career path she wants to go down, time spent on building small miniature games, looking at how she can do that, even just to get the practice in, is going to be really, really good. But that doesn't just go for coding, that goes for all disciplines. So artists need a good portfolio, coders need a good portfolio. Most disciplines in the game industry do need a portfolio. It'll be really good practice to get involved in. It'll help you with university applications as well as job applications. So yeah, getting that practice in on all different skill sets, starting to look at how you can work in game engines as well will be really helpful, because a lot of stuff is now done in a game engine. And in particular for parents who maybe have no clue how to support their child in these creative industries, do a little bit of research into companies, see what they offer. Do they offer graduate programs? Do they offer gaming schools? Do they offer work weeks where they can go and spend some time? Do a little bit of research into it to support your child, because this might be quite nervous for them, because they've maybe thinking this isn't something they can do for a career, might not have realized it. So doing your research to help support your child will be a massive confidence booster for them, and it will encourage them to look into this, because it really is a great career, and I personally wouldn't have any other industry to work in.
Wonderful. Kieran, what's your advice?
I totally agree with what Tasha just said, but I think we're all pulling the same direction. So kind of Matt's comment around not being dismissive, Nick talking about the fact that there's a lot of different paths to walk within gaming, and then Tasha kind of starting to think early about building that portfolio and kind of displaying your expertise. A piece of advice I have to give myself as a parent an awful lot is to try and nurture the creativity, because being creative, and whether it's going down the art route or going down the story building route, it takes a lot of time and practice and continuing to do it. So being able to nurture that, and then as a child, as an individual, you start to get an idea of where your interests lie. You can then start building out those portfolios and following that path. But creativity is something that is within us. So it's essentially identifying it, nurturing it, and allowing our kids to develop that skill set, which will put them in a really good place. As Rick says, we're growing so fast, and there's real, genuine, rewarding, and even more so now, secure careers within gaming. I think we probably had a reputation historically of it being not as great a story to be employed within gaming, but that's drastically changed in the last 5 to 10 years, and it's going in a really good direction. So yeah, my advice is nurture that creativity, and there's a real rewarding career at the end of it.
Fantastic. Thank you. So let's move on to older students. So teenagers, or perhaps those who are already at university, whether doing dedicated games degrees or not. Matt, what are your perspectives on older students? I'm not sure how old your kids are, if they've got to that level.
Yeah, I mean, obviously my day-to-day role is teaching at a primary level. And what I would say, kind of as a work around the question, really, is I started my teaching career in secondary and sixth form. And one of the big motivators for me to move to the primary sector was that children make decisions and choose engagement levels at an early age, and quite often came up to a secondary level disengaged with something or not quite understanding subjects. And I think so. From a primary perspective, I think it's really important to explore things like games development and coding and point out all those sections of the career that aren't obvious when you kind of sit and play a computer game. You don't think of the backstory to it. And I think if you can nurture that and then develop that, and obviously quite often with older children, you then have the technology. And you have the time and the real kind of creativity comes out then. But I think that foundation is so important, as soon as possible. And actually, as I think we've all kind of said, nurturing that and bringing that on and supporting it with resource and supporting it with encouragement is so important as children, grow up to young adults and keep that creativity going. I think that's vital. So like I say, from my point of view, I see the biggest impact being at a younger age, and then those transferable skills coming through. And I think you really can tell children, when they get to secondary school, when they get to A level, that really have that passion there because it's been ignited with them and that fire's been burning all along. So I would kind of say, if it's something that excites you, then as we've already said, keep it going, keep that passion going, keep working on that portfolio, keep working on, your evidence of your expertise in the field. So yeah, there we go.
Wonderful. Nick, what about, how do you encourage, what advice would you give to older students?
I would say, I think it goes back to what Tasha said. It's about generating stuff in portfolios, individuality, showing your skill sets, not being prescriptive, but showing a real diversity of thinking, I think is really key. Passion, passion for the subject, a passion for what you want to do is really key. And think outside of the box, think about broader sense than just that, because I think one of the most exciting things when we talk to students that are studying with us games art, it's about their ideas, about how they articulate those ideas, and that can be done in lots of different ways. Isn't this just about pitching or presenting? It could be about drawing it or writing about it, and I think that's really key to sort of developing a skill set that people are showing their passion for the subject areas.
Thank you. Tasha, you mentioned something I'd love to just tease out, if I may, around mentorship. I think people would be fascinated to hear about what that scheme is, and is that available to everyone?
So the Girls Network is what I work with. It's like a voluntary program for myself. This is particularly aimed at girls at a high school level. So basically what this allows us to do is to work with girls who are perhaps disadvantaged,
Yeah,
place in life.
underrepresented.
Yeah, that's it. it basically puts them in contact with people in studios, not just game studios, but this could be any industry. And it basically matches you up with one of us, and we match with a girl who has a relevant likes to what we do. And we work with them for a year to look at what they do, what they want to do, how we can help them, how we can benefit them, what advice we can give them, and how we can work. So this is available to schools that have signed up with the Girls Network, and you get to put your kids forward for it. And it's a full year of mentorship programs where well, it used to be you meet in person, but that doesn't really happen right now. But we kind of have video sessions. We talk about strengths, weaknesses, what we need to do in order for preparation. And in particular, for my mentee, I set up kind of talks with other relevant programmers in the different areas that she likes. So I do extra sessions with her and with the parents' consent. She gets to look at kind of example portfolio. She gets to ask them questions. She gets to find out what knowledge that she needs and able to do these industry and careers. She's getting to ask about what life is like working. It's been such a great value for both her and myself. So yeah, this is available to if you have kids in a high school level, for any kind of daughters that you have, if they kind of express an interest in this, as long as the school's signed up, then this is definitely something they can do. So yeah.
Oh, that fantastic! What an exciting scheme. I hope if anybody is interested, you'll go and check that out. Girls Network. Kieran, what advice would you give to older students?
First off, Tasha, that sounds amazing. What you're doing, it's really, really cool. My advice to older students that hasn't been given already, because there's some really good advice, Nick and Matt, and Tasha, your point earlier about continuing that portfolio, is it's probably a good time to start getting out and understanding more about the industry and the opportunities that are out there, whether that's understanding studios, games that are developed locally or in areas where you want to be, beginning to follow developers on LinkedIn and Twitter, and kind of beginning to get a bit of a presence and a way in. It's such a welcoming environment. And I know Tasha will align to this as well. We all get contacted an awful lot and reached out to from people from all over who just want to learn more. And there's never a case where we don't create an opportunity to speak to that individual and talk about the industry and the opportunities and the realities. As Rick said, it's hard, it's challenging, but it's awesome. You get to do something you really enjoy. And I think people are always kind of a little bit skeptical or just want to learn more about it. So begin to build a bit of a presence. What I mean by that is you don't need to be something, but just get out and link in, whether it's on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook or wherever, with the people who do it. And I'm probably being a bit, I think that the other opportunities there's lots of Slack channels, Discord channels, the Unreal Forum, if you're doing code, is a really good opportunity to learn and speak to new people. So yeah, it's probably time to get out there and learn more about the industry, as well as evidencing and nurturing your creativity.
Fantastic. So some wonderful advice there. Let's just move on to a final question before we open up to Q&A. And I see some questions coming in. Hold fire for a moment, and then I will start to shoot those questions across at the panelists. I mentioned diversity at the start of the session, and I'm wondering how can we encourage more diverse candidates to start games careers? And I mean, the obvious place to start is with Tasha. And I mean, stand back and look at your pathway into your role. What would you be willing to share about how you made your way through to the start? What did you need?
My pathway was a very roundabout way of getting here. So I graduated away back in 2010, and at that point, I didn't have a clear way of getting into any industry. So worth for context, my degree is in computer animation. And at that point, there weren't many graduate programs being advertised or made available to me. Freelance was a word I was terrified of because no one really explained it to me that I could still get paid for work. So without being able to secure a kind of graduate job or any sort of something like that, I ended up doing project management, which is fine because it suits my skill set well. Since doing project management in various industries, I got recruited by Axis Animation in Glasgow to become their production coordinator, which was about a 5-month contract working on in-game cinematics and trailers for like Bethesda and the Coalition. And then from there, because I had that level of experience, I was able to apply for Ubisoft, where I became a project coordinator, and then very quickly after a P&I support manager. And then I was able to move up to a technical producer role in Rebellion. So for me, it was a very roundabout way of doing it, mainly because I didn't have resources available to me. I didn't have the information necessary, and my mum and dad didn't know how to support me. My mum was a stay-at-home mum, and my dad was an aircraft engineer, so they really had no clue what to do with me. So yeah, that was my career path. So it's not typical for everybody, but it does highlight that at the time it wasn't very clear, and there probably are going to be a lot of people that don't know how to do this, and in particular possibly a lot of females. That's kind of where I start, mainly because if you look at the industry and the games that we're developing, we develop a lot of shooters. It's evident, I've worked on them myself. But it's not always what attracts female developers. So we kind of have to ask ourselves what we're doing to address that. Are we starting to create games that we want to draw in our kind of female developers? Are we starting to do that accessibility for them? Because potentially the reason why we don't have that is because we're not developing games that are of interest to everybody. They're perhaps still aimed at one particular gender type. But there's also the question when that diversity goes into that, it's not just gender specific. It can be, is it accessible for players who are perhaps disabled that can't do these things? So we know we work with like the special effect to work on that. Ethnic minorities. It's a whole ocean of questions that the industry does need to start looking at. So it's a big loaded question.
It is, but as someone who's made it, I thought it was really interesting that you described that routine as not sort of standard. And I think I mean I bang on about this subject all the time, which is about the industry often think about this pipeline of people that come through great degree courses and then they come out in the perfect shape. And but if you look at the shape of our workforce and the people who actually make games, some of them fit into that pipeline. They're often quite white and quite male. But then there are others that come in from tangents because it's a creative industry. And I think that in particular, I mean, the fact that you're a producer, I'd love to. I mean, can you produce a portfolio when you're a producer?
No,
it's really hard. Kieran's laughing. We've discussed this before. Kieran, what do you think?
Like Tasha's story isn't, as you say, isn't that unusual? Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, especially for less represented groups, that your route, Tasha, is more standard, because the door to entry is put in places where people are typically white male, and that is something we do need to think about a little bit more. The most important thing is we can do lots of great work in terms of creating the right channels to bring diverse talent into the studio. We need to create an inclusive, welcoming, comfortable environment that works for everybody, whether that's a female individual coming into the studio, a woman coming into the studio, or someone with neurodiverse challenges that needs to come into the studio. We need to bear in mind all of the various different individuals we bring in, make sure we've created the right environment. But assuming we've done that, I mean, in terms of how we do it and how I'd like to do it, we work with folks similar to you, Tasha, the Head Partnership, Hello World up in Newcastle. There's a couple of different groups we can work with that work with schools to be able to put the message and essentially deliver aspiration to students that this is a career option that they can take. Because like me, like Tasha, like probably most of us, my parents had no idea there was a career in gaming, so I didn't have a clue there was a career in gaming. So it's kind of up to us to go out and deliver that aspiration, because it isn't an obvious choice. And actually, as I said before, there's a real career at the end of it. Rewarding, lucrative, safe, however you want to put it, whatever the important things are, we're able to offer more and more of those and tick more of those boxes. But yeah, I mean, thinking about other routes in, we recently launched something called Sumo Labs, which Jake Habgood is leading, which I know some of you guys are aware of, which again is putting the door to entry. in front of degree students who maybe haven't gone down the gaming degree route, but are suddenly thinking this is a really good option, it's something I'd like to do. So we go and speak to geography students, philosophy students, and the idea is we can teach smart people to code, to create games. We can't always necessarily teach game developers to be smart. The other way around, we can get really smart people and develop them into great game developers. And we piloted something else last year, which we didn't talk too much about because we wanted to just assess whether it works, and if so, we'll look at doing it more. But we created a really small internship, 6-month internship, at one of our studios, and we advertised in private schools, we advertised to working parents, we advertised to a number of different places, and again put the door to entry in places where it just does not exist, and brought 3 interns into the studio. The idea being develop them into game developers. If it's successful, we'll roll it out and do it more, because the pool of available talent that we're all fishing in is limited. It's growing, but so are we, and it's kind of struggling to catch up. So we just need to make sure we're putting doors to available talent in the right places. So we're not just developing FPS shooters and games that are really attractive to a certain group of players, but we're developing much more rounded games. And yeah, there's other opportunities. There's things like the diversity job board, which the diversity network, where we can put roles out there in different locations. Special effect is fantastic, and I think we're all very happy to be part of that. But the critical thing for me is create the environment and then go and deliver aspiration in places where it doesn't currently exist.
Thank you, Kieran. There's some really inspiring schemes. I'm delighted to hear about the internships. I didn't know you had kept that quiet. I think you should be shouting about it.
We just wanted to see if it worked first. We didn't want to shout about it, then it'd be a bit rubbish and no one sees anything again. It's more like, let's just see if it works, and then if it does, we'll do it more. So
thank you. So Matt, I mean, you're at the other end of the scale, really. I mean, you're dealing with primary school kids. I guess why games? I mean, I'm really interested in why somebody who works in primary school is joining a day talking about interactive futures, and is there what can we learn about that, and how does diversity play in at an early age?
I think the question why games is, I think one of my passions is trying to avoid missed opportunities within development and education. And as I kind of touched on earlier on, having started my career in secondary, I saw numerous missed opportunities where, you know, there's been a flame that's been lit and it's just not been nurtured, and it kind of quickly goes out when you know, so many more things kind of come into play. And I think it's been really eye-opening, really, listening into the discussion about how, you know, highlighting the fact that games development isn't just about writing the code. It's not just about, you know, the final product on screen. It's about all those things that happen in the background. And I think from a primary school point of view, we have very few opportunities to highlight that and to showcase that. And actually, you know, as Kieran said, you know, that talent pool that you guys are all fishing from is a limited stock. You know, you've got a limited pool. Yes, it's growing, and obviously, as you said, during COVID, the industry's growing, which is fantastic. But actually, nurturing those children at a young age and highlighting, let's face it, a career. For one of my big phrases with children in primary school is the jobs that they will go into probably don't exist at the moment. You know, if you think back to, you know, when we were at primary school, you know, what was a YouTuber? You know, and actually now it's a legitimate career to do. So actually, you know, thinking about opportunity and seizing opportunity and just kind of going, do you know what? Yes, if that's your passion, if you like, you know, to play a computer game, but then you're inquisitive and you want to know more about it, why does that work? You know, and at a school level, you know, resources aren't fantastic, but at a primary school level, to actually get children to sit down on a computer and write some code and to see, you know, a little animation moving on screen, I can tell you 100% the reward that they, you know, you see in their faces is incredible, because they've done it. They've taken nothing, they've taken a blank canvas and they've made a code that works because their character moved from A to B. I think on the point of diversity, the angle I would come at of it is inclusivity, and within school, obviously, inclusivity is everything. It's our, you know, our be all and end all. And actually, what we strive to achieve is a level playing field. During COVID, in particular, during homeschooling, it's been really, really evident that there's a big gap between the haves and the have-nots. And there are a lot of children, you know, at home at the moment who haven't got the games to play on, you know, they haven't got the devices to play on, but equally haven't got the technology to do their lessons. So in terms of leveling the playing field, for me, I suppose my biggest plea, if you like, would be that there is more kind of resources, more engagement at a lower level within schools, because I can tell you the commitment that you get from a 9-year-old who wants to make that little character move across the screen is just as great as somebody who's being paid 20, 30 grand to do it, you know, because they just want to make that little character move. So putting that support in at an earlier age and really nurturing and fanning that flame, I think would certainly impact on that talent pool that Kieran mentioned. And you know, you're not going to get a brand new game tomorrow from a 9-year-old child that can go out and sell, but what you will get is somebody that sticks to doing that portfolio and thinks, you know what, yeah, I'm good at this, I can have a go at this. And then in 10 years time, they might be sitting, you know, on a panel discussing it like we are today. So inclusivity and leveling the playing field, I think, is really, really important.
We've seen exactly that in the museum. We had a fantastic project that's run a couple of years now, where we give people with no technical skills the ability in a really short amount of time to create an avatar of themselves and then drop it into a game and then see that move around and interact. And because if you've got diverse people making those avatars, they see themselves in a game, and it's so powerful, because for some communities, the underrepresented communities, that is really rare, and the representations of those communities are often completely skewed by, you know, the cultural biases of some developers. And it's a very powerful self-confidence building sort of exercise. Nick, what about diversity? I know diversity is a subject you're keen on. What's the perspective from the university?
So from the university, we do it in a number of different ways. One of the things we do quite a lot of work on is something called widening participation, where we go into schools and deliver projects and do all sorts of things. And again, it goes back to this whole point is how do I get a job in the creative arts? What is the creative arts, you know? And when I was at primary school, there wasn't even such a thing as a computer. So I think and my father had no idea when I went into the arts what was going to happen. So I think there's that part of it, which is going back and working in schools around sort of supporting the schools with projects. We do quite a lot of events in the city as well. So things like Robot Day, where we interact with the general public to do a whole range of different activities. And that's something obviously we'll continue to do with the City of Culture. But we also bring, what we've done quite a lot of work on is bringing industry into the actual university. So working with us as sort of industry advisory panels, and also bringing in project briefs or problems that we can give to students to sort of try and solve and work with. And then we very much encourage work placement. All of my courses have an opportunity at the end of their second year to go and do work placement. And we're really keen to support that. And it might be a whole range of different types of work placement, not just one. And certainly our advice, we push quite heavily on looking at careers advice, not at the end of the degree, but actually starting in your first year. So making sure people understand what the career structure could look like and how it could work. So we do it at both ends, I suppose, in that sense, trying to support that diversity. We are very passionate about trying to bring people in. So we have also flexible modes of study to sort of support people from a whole range of diverse backgrounds, whether that's mature learners or learners from a sort of a diversity group. So I think what Matt said is inclusivity is something that we need to include everybody into that discussion and debate. And that's what the university, and certainly my school, is very passionate about.
Wonderful. Well, I mean, I'm so glad to hear that, and I know a lot of people listening will be glad to hear that. Let's go to a couple of questions that we've had on the chat. I'm going to start with, I don't know who wants to pick these up, but just stick your hand up. Where's the best place to start if you've never done any coding before?
Yes, that would be my area, eh? So for coding, I would say it's really good to start looking at the industry languages that get used. Python is a big one, C#, C++, these are all big coding languages. But it's also important to understand, and this is where it starts to get a little bit tricky as to what sort of area you want to go into. So it does start to get a wee bit trickier. But if you can have kind of a kind of all-rounder in that coding languages, start with one. Always just start with one. Start playing around with it, get your basics, get your kind of scripting language down, and start to understand why something does the way it does it, and what kind of ramifications come when you do something wrong. Each of these languages you should be able to download for free and to start playing around with it. There are lots of online tutorials for beginners to teach you basic things like how to tell a program to say hello world. And getting that down is going to be really good for you, because once you learn one language, it's kind of transferable to others, so it's not so daunting to learn the next set. There will be nuances to each kind of coding language, but it is good to start looking at that. And what I would look at is what's being used in the industry, and those three are the big ones that I know of. There are lots of other which do come in handy, but those are the big three. So yeah, definitely start looking at what used in industry and pick one, get that down before you move on to the next, and start doing small kind of tasks and building small things, and just be curious with it, see what you can do.
Kieran, any thoughts on guiding people towards, I mean, maybe for the younger players or younger people?
That's where I was going to go, actually, yeah, because it's kind of putting folks in a position where they're able to pick up on what Tash was saying. So did a bit of work with pretty young kids, and one really good tool randomly is Minecraft. The redstone in creativity mode on Minecraft is amazing for just the cause and effect and creating various input and outputs. And then I actually asked this question of the coders at Sumo when I joined, because my little boy's really interested in code. And they threw a load of tools at me that they suggested were quite good. But what we found worked with James particularly was Scratch, just because it's very simple and straightforward. And then it puts them on a course towards a place where they can start looking at learning code that's going to create real tools that Tash has mentioned, and that's really useful if you're wanting to build shopping lists or bots that help you in your day-to-day life, all the way through to building really cool games. Code is just an invaluable skill set, I think, to have, and it's hard work, but it's not rocket science. It's rocket science when you start getting into the really tough stuff, but the basics of it is pretty straightforward.
We use Scratch and Twine actually in workshops in the galleries for families to come in and make games, and it's really accessible, not forbidding. On to the next question. I'm just keeping an eye on time, and I think we've got roughly 10 more minutes. So I'm just going to read it out. For parents to encourage their kids, would it be a good idea to bring in old games and see how they worked in their generations and how it has evolved over the decades, like the limited movement in PlayStation 1 cutscenes or the limited colours in NES games? I'm chomping at the bit to say something about that, but I'll let anybody else who'd like to. Nick, what do you think on that one?
I would certainly do it. I've been playing around with virtual reality for a while and just looking at some of that. So headset right here. But they've just put out Myst, the original Myst game, and virtual reality. You lost me for a couple of days there. So I think looking at some of that is really interesting in the sense of the sort of the past. So I would say, yes, look at old games, see what they look like, go back to them. There's a fantastic legacy and I would say history, cultural history, I suppose, around some of those games, which are worth just exploring. So definitely, yeah.
Tasha, I saw you nodding there. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, absolutely. History of game development is important to understand where you've been to where you're going. If you look at some of the old games like Spyro or Crash Bash on the PS1 to their remastered releases on like the Xbox One or the PS4, so much has changed. The graphics are so different. It's still the exact same game, but it just looks nicer now, and there's a lot more freedom. The controls are smoother. You're not constantly being blocked by boundary boxes anymore. But yeah, it's important to know where you're going so you know where you've been and what you're advancing in. So definitely looking into the history of your games and seeing what's available now and how far we've come along, I'd say is important.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And in fact, there's a campaign that's been running about saving video games arcades, and you almost exactly the same sentence that you just used about knowing where how do you know where you're going if you don't know where you're from? And so I completely agree. Obviously, the National Video Game Museum, that's what it's for. I mean, we have nearly 100, outside of COVID, it's about 80 at the moment, but we have up to 100 playable titles from over 40 years, and we absolutely love bringing in students to play and then talk about what the games mean in our workshops. So thank you for that. Let's move on. We've got did anyone else want to pick that one up, or no? Okay. Should schools be suggested to allow some educational game engines like Scratch to convince kids to make a group project of a game, something they can work on during breaks with their friends?
Yes.
Absolutely, and I think that collaboration is a fantastic, thing that should happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting something educational like that and to encourage teamwork amongst the kids and get them used to building their own little projects and games. It'll do them wonders for when they come to do their own projects later on, starting to get them ready for how do I work with other people.
It is something that we try and encourage within school currently, even at the primary school level, is actually getting groups of children to work together to communicate ideas, to storyboard it out, start on paper, and to work together, in a collaboration to come up with something. And actually, one of the biggest skills that we get from that is children learn how to challenge each other in a productive manner and build that resilience of being able to be challenged, or take on board suggestions of, well, actually maybe change this, change that, and it becomes very, very much a collaborative effort to produce the end goal. So it's definitely something I encourage within my school, and something I would hope is encouraged across across schools, because it's the additional learning that goes with that, the kind of the socialization, the kind of teamwork, sharing ideas, resilience is massive, even if the actual output isn't what the desired start point was. Really important. So definitely, yeah.
I was talking to a studio last week who is assessing every single portfolio that's developed by their local university, all the games development degrees across the subjects. And the thing that they picked out was not just giving feedback, but giving how difficult it is to give creative feedback on a young person's own work. And being able to take that feedback is such an important piece of learning, because once you get into a job in a studio, your work in a collaborative environment is constantly being tested. And it reminds me of something that Tasha said earlier about getting something wrong. And in fact, and I know, Tasha, you didn't mean that pejoratively at all, because that's how we learn. We learn by making mistakes and then improving. And games companies, one of the founding principles of how you make a game is that you're iterating, you're improving gradually over periods of time. And the only way you can iterate is to acknowledge, oh, that didn't work, how are we going to fix it? And that can be such an important life skill, just as you suggest, Matt. It's so important. We're almost out of time, but we've got one other question that I'm gonna ask. I'm a white male looking for a production role in the game industry. It's a tough one. Is it now harder for me to find a production job since a lot of studios are saturated with white males and trying to become more diverse? Kieran?
100% not. I think what we're talking about at the moment is putting the door to entry in the right places. That's for you to be able to get to in front of a studio. Once you're there, the assessment process is let's get the right person for the role. There's nothing else. There's no other decisions that go into it. It's do you have the skills? Yes or no. Are they better than the other candidates? Yes or no. You've got the job. I think what we're trying to talk about here is creating the opportunities for people who are from less represented groups to get the door to get in front of us in the first place. There's no positive discrimination that goes on in our industry. It would do us a disservice. It would do you a disservice, and we want the best people in our roles. That's the most important thing to us.
Fantastic. Well, I'm tempted to kind of close our session, because I was told 5 minutes ago that we had 5 minutes. So I just want to thank those who've been sending us in questions. Thank all of our speakers for what I hope has been, I found it very inspirational conversation with you all. Thank you so much. And looking forward to seeing the rest of the day at Interactive Futures.